Very much everyone for joining us today. We've got a really stellar lineup ready to rock and roll to talk to you about Paralympic pathways and classification. I just wanted to say a big thank you to Vic Health and Sport and Recreation Victoria for supporting our Disability Sport and Recreation Festival, and also Paralympics Australia for supporting this panel event today. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, wherever that may be, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that our sovereignty on this land was never ceded. I'll now hand you over to Tim Matthews, who is a Paralympic extraordinaire, and he's going to walk you through the panel event today.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks everyone for joining us, and again, thanks for the Disability Sport and Recreation Victoria for putting on the festival, and great to be a part of it. Today we're going to have a chat about classification and the process for classification across multiple impairment groups and sports, and also touch on parasport pathways, and looking forward to chatting to you today. We've got a couple of great panel members as part of the team. We've got Josh Hose, who's a wheelchair rugby gold medalist, also has participated in para athletics. Marty Jackson is a Commonwealth medalist in shot put and Australian representative at World Championships in para ice hockey. And myself, I'm the senior manager of parasport for Paralympics Australia, and I'd also competed in a few Paralympic Games quite some time ago now. First to you, Josh. Thanks for joining us. You've had a great career in Paralympic sport to this point, but I guess it all started when you suffered a spinal cord injury back in 2005 in a motor vehicle accident. Can you maybe take us through what happened there and what happened following?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I was had a spinal cord injury, so I was in a car accident. So I grew up in southwest Victoria, down in Camperdown, and on Australia Day 2005, a mate was driving and lost control of the vehicle, and and I had the incident that you mentioned, and then going through rehab and all that sort of stuff is where I actually sort of came across wheelchair rugby, which I think we can touch on later on. But I sort of went back home for a couple of years, just doing all my physio and rehab. And then about 2009, I sort of moved down to Melbourne.
And you got involved in wheelchair rugby around that time?
Yeah, so it was, oddly enough, at the rehab is where I first saw wheelchair rugby. And given I was an 18-year-old, playing AFL, I loved all that physical side of the sports. And having suffered the injury, I thought, many of these things may not be possible. And when I saw the physicality of wheelchair rugby, I was immediately hooked.
And you competed in London. Tell us about what London was like as an athlete.
Yeah, so I guess London came around after the 2010 one of the Worlds, but London was amazing. They sort of announced the teams about 6 months out, so you got all that build up and all that all that adrenaline leading up into it. But the opening ceremony was amazing. If you can picture an MCG size field just packed and just rolling out to represent your country, it was very surreal.
And you then went across to, you've been pursuing athletics for a little while. Tell us how you got involved in athletics.
Yeah, athletics was just more taken up as a bit of a recreational, just a bit of to stay fit after I sort of stepped back from the wheelchair rugby in 2016 after Rio. And yeah, I just really enjoyed the individual side of it, or individual athlete side of things. And yeah, I enjoyed it, got to do some travel with it, competed over in Switzerland, interstate as well. And I really enjoyed that whole process of just, learning a new craft, if you will.
Yeah, great. And you're back in the squad for Tokyo now. and we'll touch on that a little bit shortly. But in terms of when you started out after your accident, how did you, I guess, make a decision in terms of which sports you wanted to pursue following your accident?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I saw the wheelchair rugby, and I really was just taken by the physical nature of the sport and the group of guys, and they were really supportive, and it was great with DSR, who we're doing this in coordination with today. Ran a local league, so I guess the grassroots, if you will, for a local comp, and I got involved with that initially, and it sort of fed from there, where I got invited to a selection camp with the Australian team, and it sort of really built through there. But initially it was just through the local comp.
Yeah, and following your career, I guess, with the head coach of the Paralympic wheelchair rugby team as a former athlete, what do you think about athletes giving back and the ways they might be able to contribute when you finish competing?
Oh, look, Paralympic sports or disability sports, a lot of it is unknown for new individuals coming through. So when you first start a sport, there's different things with equipment, technique, all these sort of things. So any of us that are experienced and gone through those hurdles to suss it all out, it's on us to give back and help those individuals coming through. And I've definitely found that with the rugby and with the athletics, everyone I've reached out to, they've been more than supportive, and I really encourage those new individuals coming through and the coaches, really reach out to all the individuals within whatever sport you're pursuing, because they're more than helpful with their time.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Josh. And we'll come back with some more questions as we get through. Over to you, Marty. You are superstar, former gridiron legend. Tell us about how you sustained your injury in terms of playing your sport and the damage that was caused, which then enabled you to be eligible for parasport.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I played American football for 14 years, and it was just a regular home game, and we were doing quite well. And I think my injury was probably a result of knowing the game too well. I had pre-read the play, so I knew where it was going, and I made a beeline for the tackle, and unfortunately one of my teammates had come in low as well. So that resulted as he went through to make the tackle, his helmet went straight on my knee, and it dislocated my leg from the knee, and sustained some nerve injuries. And from that point on, it just never felt it again. So yeah.
And at what point, Marty, did you become aware that you might be eligible for Paralympic sport? Because whilst you had the injury, it's not, you didn't lose your leg, or you're not in a wheelchair, and your leg's obviously affected. So at what point did you understand that you might be eligible for parasport?
Well, Tim, I've told this story many a time, but you've never been sitting in front of me, so this is quite cool.
Okay.
I love sport. Sport is my life, and I've just committed myself to it. The doctors, I think, following the injury, after they did the first sort of initial assessment, they always sort of give you a worst case scenario. You may not walk correctly. So it was from that point there, I was like, well, I'm not ready to throw in sport. It's just not for me. So the following morning after the injury, lying in hospital, feeling a little bit sorry for myself, I started Googling parasport and some of the, I suppose, the impairments that fit. And I Googled your name, actually, and sent off an email saying, hi, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is what's happened. And yeah,
I can remember your email, Marty, because it stood out for me. There was one line, it said, I can't remember anything else about it, but I can remember that it said, I train like a third string and I play like a king.
Correct. Yeah, that's my that's my motto. I was always taught people just to train train like you've got to fight for your position, and train like you've got to fight for selection. And then when you're out there, you can play like you own it and enjoy the moment. Yeah.
And then in terms of you getting involved in para athletics, how did that start? How did that go about?
I think we arranged a meeting with yourself, actually, and I hobbled out on my crutches into the Paralympics office there at Essendon, and we had a little bit of a chat about sports that we would possibly be eligible for. There's obviously different sports have different criteria, and we went through a few. I couldn't see myself sitting in a canoe, which I think was one of the.
It was.
I'm 112 kilos, so the boat might, But we looked at athletics, and there was quite a few guys with similar sort of impairments. And I remember you showing me a video of Dan Greaves, the British Paralympian in discus, and I thought, these are the guys that I want to compete with. So we chose athletics, and
And you've also ventured across to the cold side, if you like, in para ice hockey. Tell us about some of your experiences there.
Well, obviously one of the hardest things for me was going from a team sport into individual. So I love athletics. I love the commitment to it. I love the sport, but I really missed that physicality. And Josh touched on that before about, the physicality of his sport. There was a come and try day advertised on Facebook for para ice hockey, and I thought, had a look at a video on YouTube, and I went, that's for me. Absolutely, that's for me. Wasn't sure whether I'd classify, but we went along and committed and just kept training, and that's something for me is just prepare for opportunities, and if you're ready, and it'll happen. So.
And we'll come back to that later. But in terms of your, you've had the opportunity to compete at the 2018 Commonwealth Games. I was a part of that team with you. That was a great event, and you did pretty well for yourself there.
Yeah, I did. The Commonwealth Games, home games, is something you just cannot describe to people. I think it was 40,000 Aussie fans packed in the stadium. Nothing prepares you for walking out into the stadium and seeing little kids with drawings of Marty and a shot put. As you're walking around. But I loved that moment. I prepared really well. I was really happy with my performance, and parasport has given me such great opportunities. I got to share meals with people like Kurt Fernley and Sally Pearson, and have a beer with them afterwards. So they're things that you can only dream of. Yeah.
And in terms of you getting involved in parasport, what have you found? Is there anything that you found that's frustrating or been frustrating in terms of that transition?
Oh, look, early on was just understanding where I fit in the scheme of things. And, I think I've been classified in different sports probably about 5 times. But the classification instrument is an evolving document, and it evolves with the more athletes present. Every injury, every disability is different. And I think we all form part of that document. So I can see some changes since I've been in the sport as well with the athletics classification.
Yeah.
But just learning to understand where you fit and how to prepare.
Yeah. And just touch on quickly maybe a piece of advice for young athletes looking to get involved in parasport.
The best time to start was yesterday, and and get involved today. There are so many opportunities out there. I could not have dreamed what my life over the last 4 years would have been like, or 5 years since my injury in 2014. 6 years. Geez, that's gone quick.
Yep.
But get involved and be a part of the groups. Get involved and share time with other people with disabilities, and also people that are able-bodied athletes. And if you want to go all the way, just get in there with the best and learn from them, and go chase it.
Great, thanks, Marty, and thanks also, Josh. And we'll come back to you guys as we progress through the presentation. So moving on to classification itself, just to explain what classification is in parasport. Essentially what it does, it provides a structure for fair competition. It's not always even, but the aim of the system is to ensure that competition's fair. Classification is already common across many able-bodied sports. For example, sports might use weight classes or age groups or even historical performance, such as a golf handicap, to then grade players or ensure that competition is fair amongst a group of people that have similar levels of ability. So in weightlifting, we use weight categories. In boxing, we use weight categories again. In school sport, we use age categories. So it's just a simple way or a different way of separating individuals to ensure that competition is fair. And classification is actually no different to that. In terms of the aims of classification in Paralympic sport, as I mentioned, it's to start with, what we want to do is determine if the athlete has an eligibility or is eligible to compete in that sport. Not all impairments are eligible for Paralympic sport. That doesn't mean to say you can't participate in sport, but in terms of a para pathway, there's certain impairment groups that are eligible, and we'll touch on that shortly. And there's also a minimum impairment criteria. So just having an impairment or a disability doesn't mean you're actually eligible. There's a minimum criteria that needs to impact on your sport for that to be considered enough to be eligible for Paralympic sport. Classification, as I mentioned, groups athletes together for fair and meaningful competition. The reality, though, in para sport is that some sports or some classifications might seem to be fairer than others. And I'll explain that a little bit in a moment. Classification rules are also very different for each sport. They might be similar if it's for the same impairment group, such as vision impairment or intellectual impairment, but particularly for athletes with a physical impairment, the classification rules are different for each sport and they're relevant to those sports. Some sports have just one eligible impairment or class, such as para ice hockey and powerlifting. So to be eligible for those sports, you need to have a leg impairment and you need to meet the minimum criteria. And then if you do, you're essentially all in the one class. So Marty, you've played para ice hockey. Can you maybe touch on a couple of the different impairment types that you've participated with, in addition to yourself, and how that might be deemed to be fair when you're on the ice?
Yeah, well, para ice hockey is lower leg impairment or lower impairment. I still have both my legs. I just have the paralysis in one, but you know, it varies from single amputees to cerebral palsy, any of those sort of things. There's double amputees. Everyone's on a sled at the end of the day, and so the legs are out of action if they're there. So you're strapped into a sled. The sleds vary. But look, to be honest, having two legs is probably a little bit more of a disadvantage in para ice hockey because you have the extra weight. But yeah, it's such a varying classification. But you're right, just one classification.
Yeah. So then there's other sports that have multiple classifications. Athletics, I think, currently has 31. So all of those, most of those impairments across a range of those sports can be broken up into subcategories, if you like, within sports that have multiple classes. So in athletics, there's lots and lots of 100-meter races, whether it be ambulant or wheelchair or vision impaired. But then in other sports, there's very few, and that's just the nature of Paralympic sport, because each system is tailored to the rules of that sport to ensure that competition's fair. And the next slide, there we go. In terms of the impairments which are eligible for Paralympic sport, an athlete needs to be from a physical impairment perspective, you need to have one of the following impairment types with, as I mentioned, a minimum level of criteria to be eligible for Paralympic sport. So the first one is limb deficiency. So that might be through amputation, trauma, or congenital at birth. Hypertonia, ataxia, athetosis, common conditions or common health conditions with individuals that might have cerebral palsy or MS, or in Marty's case, some nerve damage, Also, short stature is eligible for Paralympic sport. There's a maximum height restriction in terms of being eligible. Also, reduced muscle power, which would affect someone who might have had a spinal cord injury, such as yourself, Josh. Reduced range of movement, and also leg length difference. So someone who, to be eligible for para sport, you need to have a leg length difference of greater than 7 centimetres to be eligible for that classification. In terms of athletes with an intellectual impairment, you need to have an IQ score of 75 or lower on an internationally recognised test. You need to have demonstrated limitations in terms of your social or interpersonal communication skills and self-care skills. And the evidence of the impairment needs to be identified before the age of 18 years. So Sport Inclusion Australia manage the classification process and deliver that for athletes with an intellectual impairment throughout the country. There is a modified system for school sport, but essentially that process is pretty similar. So unfortunately, currently not athletes with an intellectual impairment are not eligible for every Paralympic sport. It doesn't mean to say they're not able to play lots of different sports, but from a Paralympic perspective, currently only table tennis, swimming and athletics include athletes with an intellectual impairment at the Paralympic Games. And then on to athletes with a vision impairment who are blind or vision impaired. To be eligible for para sport, again, doesn't mean to say you can't participate in any sport at any level from an able-bodied or participation perspective, but to be eligible for Paralympic sport, you need to have an impairment that is affecting both eyes. So you can't just be blind in one eye and have full vision in the other. Then you would not be eligible for Paralympic sport. And in simple terms, I guess what someone might see from a normal vision perspective, at what we might see at 60 metres, an athlete with that's eligible for Paralympic sport will see that at 6 metres. Or they might have a visual field that's less than a diameter of 40 degrees, and athletes are tested on with and without correction to the eyes, and the athlete's classification is determined by what the vision is in the best eye. So from a vision impaired perspective, Paralympics Australia manage the classification process at a national level. Internationally, it's a different organisation. And athletes in these sports or these events who have a vision impairment may compete with a guide runner, or they might compete on a tandem with a stoker on the bike, or they might compete completely independent, depending on their level of vision. In terms of the actual classification pathway within Australia, so to start with, there is a provisional process for maybe for regional athletes or some that don't have an opportunity to get to a classification, particularly through the COVID related issues this year. There's a number of sports that have trialled delivering classification via Zoom across a range of sports and that's been quite successful. So that might get rolled out a little bit further, but it is a challenge depending on what the impairment is. Obviously, that can be pretty straightforward if it's an athlete who's an amputee, and being able to demonstrate where that amputation is quite straightforward. But for someone such as Josh or Marty, some of those tests involved in classification might be a little bit more complex. So that might be a bit more challenging to deliver at a provisional level. But in Australia, a national classification may be required to compete at domestic competition, such as state championships or national championships. And it may also be required by the sport or for your sport to be eligible to be considered for international competition and international classification. International classification is required. It's basically the same process as the national classification. We deliver, where possible, the international process within the Australian context, because that ensures that the accuracy of the classification is as reliable as possible. But for international competition, whether that's regional, World Cups, World Championships, Paralympic Games, you would certainly require an international classification, and you'd be supported by your national federation to go through that process. The reality of classification in parasport, depending on the impairment of the athlete, an athlete may be classified multiple times over their career. So I guess, Josh, in terms of wheelchair rugby specifically, can you maybe take us through the process that you went through to get classified? And have you only been classified once, or have you been classified more than once?
So to get my actual classification overall, it gets done over three times. And so the first, well, it was 4 times in total, but my first one was done within Australia at I guess you could say at a state base. And then when I made the Australian team, you get done once, and then you have to get done 10 months later. And then you have to get, after that one, you got to get done again following another 10 months. So it was 3 all up. But yeah, it was an interesting process, you know, and it's done by all the guys are generally physios or the medical background that do it. And yeah, it's quite interesting the process they go into it. I was actually intrigued that he said it was done on Zoom, because with our tests, a lot of it is done, in my case, particularly with the hands and all that strength components. So yeah, I was interested to see how that would have went down over Zoom. Yeah,
some of that, obviously, depending on the impairment, may not be possible, but it also might, some of those tests might be able to be done with a physio, for instance, with you with the physio via Zoom. So the classifier might be communicating with the physio. So there's some of those things in play. And obviously, in terms of the, you mentioned you need to get classified 4 times. That particular process is specific to rugby and wheelchair rugby. And as I mentioned, each sport has its own system. In terms of yourself, Marty, you are I guess what might be considered a borderline athlete in some respects. In terms of your impairment. Are you able to maybe take us through that process for yourself, and whether you need to be, whether you're confirmed or review, or where you're at in terms of your classification?
Yeah, well, I was just looking at your slide there, so I've gone through all of that. But look, I originally was classified very early with national classification, and I was classified in a separate class. And that was probably more about me not understanding my disability as much as I do now. So I think with the document was reclassified. So I think all the 30 classes in athletics, which is your ataxia, hypotonia, or like a cerebral palsy class. Yeah. So that was all changed. So I had to be reclassified again. And I ended up in that class, but that whole class is on review. So I think you have to be classified. I think I don't have to be classified till 2023 or something, because it's not likely to change for me. Whereas some are still developing and changing, their disability might change. So that's why they have that in place. In regards to the para ice hockey, that was quite an interesting situation, because we were going to travel to Finland for World Champs. Fortunately for me, the Paralympics Australia set up a pre-classification day where we came and just to see whether it was likely we were going to pass. Because yes, in para ice hockey, I'm very on the fringe, but we travelled to Finland and did my classification there, and there was no worries. I think you kind of get yourself a little bit worried when you don't have a clear disability, like an amputation or something like that. But when it came down to it, the instrument worked very well, and it demonstrated exactly how it affects me for that sport.
Yeah, thanks, Marty.
A couple of points, if I can, Tim.
Sure, Josh.
So like I had my classification done 10 years ago, and just for individuals to know out there, if you were to sustain another injury, and you've alluded to it earlier, Tim, where you might lose some function, you can actually go for a review. And then also within your classification being done, Marty mentioned he might be on the fringe. You can actually protest the classification. So you and your coach and your team would assess that if it's a viable option. But there's many pathways within the actual classification process that can be, sought out.
Yeah, like I guess like everything, good point there, Josh, and like everything, the classification is based on a set of rules that need to be followed, and depending on, they might be interpreted in different ways depending on who's classifying someone, but there are some principles that, and so obviously all the classifiers, and I'll get onto this now in terms of the training, but that it's not an exact science, and that's a reality. So, and rules change within sport rules change. That may mean someone who was previously not eligible might be eligible, but it also might mean someone who might be eligible now in future might not be eligible for that sport. So it's just something to consider across the range of sports. In terms of classifiers themselves, classifiers are trained to assess athletes using the actual rules or the classification rules within each sport. Classification or classifiers either have medical expertise, so they might be a doctor or a physio, or they might also have some technical expertise in the sport, or might be a biomechanist associated with the sport. Classifiers generally work together in a panel of 2 or 3, particularly for athletes with a physical impairment, and they assess athletes and provide an outcome of that assessment, and I'll touch on that shortly. So in Australia, Paralympics Australia works with the national sport organisations to train classifiers, and also the NSODs, so the National Sporting Organisations for the Disabled. And currently there's about 170 classifiers throughout the country working across 22 Paralympic sports. And some of those are also international classifiers, and some of them also, we're quite lucky in Australia. We've got a great level of experience of classifiers in the country, and some of those classifiers are also head of international classification for their respective sport. In terms of the process, we've touched on it briefly, but so to start with, what you need to do is provide medical evidence of your impairment, and then athletes are scheduled to be assessed by the classifiers, and that generally occurs at a competition. And there's a couple of reasons for that. After the classification's completed, an outcome of that classification is provided to the athlete and to the sport, and that may be a review status, which we've touched on, that the impairment might not be stable, or it might be a degenerative condition, so the classification might be at review, or it might be confirmed. So if someone is a below knee amputee, they've lost their leg, it's not coming back, it's pretty clear that that's not going to change. So unless they may come back to be classified if, as Josh mentioned, they acquire another impairment or sustain another injury, but essentially to be eligible for parasport, they're a below knee amputee, and that's confirmed. There's a process that classifiers go through in terms of bench testing. After they've reviewed the medical information that's been provided, they'll conduct a range of tests depending on what the impairment is, and then they'll undertake a technical assessment. So they'll actually watch you participate in the event or the sport, not in competition at this stage. So they'll just observe you play, or in the case of athletics, they might observe you throwing a shot put, Marty, or Josh watching you on the court push and throw and catch a ball in wheelchair rugby, and just see how your function is in that situation. And then what they might also do, depending on the impairment, is observe you in competition, just to see that what they've seen in terms of the medical evidence and the testing and the technical assessment all matches up, and then they'll come back together and make a decision in terms of where you fit from that sport, from that point. I'll touch on mainstreaming of sport in Australia. We've got a great history of the disability sports organisations throughout the country across all different impairment groups, doing a great job in delivering opportunities for people to participate in parasport across all sports. We've got, I guess, what might be considered a mainstreaming philosophy in Australia, where most of the national high performance sport programs are managed by the national sport organisation for that sport. So in athletics case, Marty, that would be Athletics Australia, manage and deliver the high performance program. But then at lower levels of the pathway, or for specific impairment groups at lower levels of the pathway, there might be a range of providers who are delivering opportunities to participate in sport that hopefully they're connected to the pathway. So Disability Sport and Recreation Victoria might be delivering competition opportunities for wheelchair rugby, or participation opportunities in a range of different sports, or it might be Blind Sports Victoria, or there's other organisations, whether that be private enterprise or groups that might be funded through the NDIS or councils to deliver participation opportunities. So people can participate, but then once you compete and get involved at a higher level in most sports, it's the national federation, that national sport organisation, that looks to deliver that high performance program, often with funding that's provided by the Australian Institute of Sport, high performance funding, which is provided to support the delivery of high performance teams and ultimately win, hopefully win World Championship and Paralympic medals. We certainly encourage collaboration between a range of organisations who might bring different levels of knowledge or expertise or different experiences to programs, and support the development of club-based initiatives, because obviously at that sort of level, that get involved level, we can't have Paralympic teams and successful Paralympic teams if there's not opportunities to participate at lower levels of the pathway. And I'll just go through, I guess this is a description of the pathway, and feel free to jump in here, guys. But if we start from the bottom, we've got some come and try participation type programs. And on the left there, that's the state sporting organisations. In the green, the state sporting organisations for disabled might also be involved in this level. And then, so to participate in sport, you don't need to be classified. There's no requirement to be a competitor, a local athletics club, to get a classification. But if you compete in a parasport pathway, and that might be at school sport through School Sport Victoria or some of their programs, whether it be at primary level or secondary level, particularly in athletics and swimming, for those programs at school sport, then you need to be classified. But the importance of classification in parasport is it also provides you context of where you fit and what the opportunities might be for you to participate at higher levels of the pathway, if that's your desire or your interest. So I'd say the earlier you get classified, or the opportunity to get classified, the better off in terms of understanding where you fit. And in some cases, you might just want to play wheelchair basketball with your mates and have a good time, and that's great. But for those who have I guess a performance mindset, they might have come from an elite able-bodied sport and acquired an impairment, or they just love competing at higher levels, then it's important to get classified, because then what you can do is work out which sports you might be eligible for to start with, but also which sports you may or may not be competitive in from a high performance perspective. And the reality is, just because someone's eligible for a sport doesn't necessarily mean they're competitive, and doesn't give you a right to go to a Paralympic Games. But it might give you an idea, like the process we went through, Marty, initially to work out which sports you're eligible for, and you can tick off some of those that you're not interested in. And then if you are eligible, I know Marty was keen to compete at a high level, so it's a matter of working out which sport might be best suited for Marty to enable him to compete at a high level.
And then the weeks of training.
Yes. Yeah. Obviously, that's right, Josh. Having a disability and playing sport doesn't mean you are a high performance athlete. I am often speaking to groups or individuals who assume that because they have a disability and they want to play sport, that suddenly they will end up at the Paralympic Games. But it's a massive commitment, particularly internationally now. High performance para sport, yeah, the level of competition has gone through the roof. I think I can remember 20 years ago saying how hard it had got from 4 years before that, and it's progressively got more difficult. So it really is the best of the best at that level. But there's obviously a process to get to that point. So to start with, you'd compete in your local school sport competitions. If you're young, then you might be eligible to qualify for state championships and state level competition, and then compete. Your performances ultimately determine if you're eligible for national competition, and sports might categorize athletes depending on their potential. So depending on your potential, you might also receive some additional support, whether that might be through the National Institute network, such as the Victorian Institute of Sport or others throughout the country. There might be some emerging talent squads. Athletes then might be progressed to a high performance squad. They might also receive direct athlete support, which is some funding to help you commit to training and be supported to travel internationally to competitions and events. Obviously at that level, once you're at the high performance end, then you're required to seek that international classification and be supported to obtain that. Then World Championships, and ultimately we want the best Paralympic or best Paralympic team possible. So those that are committed and work hard and are in the right sport and supported. Ultimately, we want to see athletes compete at the Paralympic Games. So Josh and Marty, have you got any comments or suggestions around any of that pathway there?
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly. You mentioned about getting classified early if you want to sort of participate, but particularly in athletics or in the throws events. So I could have competed as an able-bodied athlete just at local competition. However, without the classification, I wouldn't be throwing the right weighted implement. So it'd be really hard to gauge where I sat in the scheme of things. So my F38 classification allows me to throw a 5K shot. So that's a huge difference between, if I competed as an able-bodied, I'd be throwing the 7.26, which is the quite large. It's what they throw at the Olympics as well. So it can make a difference earlier and allow you to see where you sit and how far you can progress. Yeah.
And just adding that, Tim, like to your point, with these pathways, if you guys can get in early, it gives you a really good perspective because, there's a massive pathway there. And if you get into the system, and I know for emerging and developing different sports, if you can get into the BIS, they're fantastic. So the BIS isn't just a gym, you get access to recovery, dietitians, physios, the whole gamut. So it really just opens your eyes early on as an athlete and just have an understanding of what it may take to reach those levels.
Yeah. Now we've got a question coming, boys, around we've seen a couple of new sports introduced into the Olympic Games, including breakdancing. If there were some non-traditional sports to come into the Paralympic sphere, what would you guys like to see? Don't hold back, Marty. I'm sure you got some good ideas on this one.
Yeah, they're going to be sports.
Keep in mind who's online here, Marty.
Yes. Well, the Paralympic American football would be fantastic.
Oh, yeah?
That'd be pretty cool. Mind you, there are some pretty high-level college athletes, amputees and that out there. So, but let me have a think about that.
Yeah. There's some leg amputees that compete at a high level, aren't there, in gridiron?
Yeah. I think Coney Dole is one that stands out for me. So he was really successful linebacker in college. He may have just finished, but I think actually one of the NFL quarterbacks has just had a recent injury similar to mine, probably not as affected, but it's out there. Yeah.
What about you, Josh? Any random sports you think should be included in the Paralympic Games?
Geez, nothing comes to mind. But for the Victorians, I know the AFL wheelchair is growing, so that might be an option maybe.
Yeah, I did want to just touch on that actually, Josh. There's obviously lots of sports that individuals can participate in at a range of levels that are not necessarily Paralympic sports. And wheelchair AFL has really taken off, and Disability Sport and Rec Victoria have done a great job in terms of their involvement and development and support of that league. And from a Paralympics Australia perspective, we're obviously really supportive of that. We want more people with a disability playing sport and being active. Ultimately, some of those individuals may progress in wheelchair AFL and get to a level where they want to taste that international level of competition and may transition across to other sports. But we're certainly fully supportive of everyone participating in a range of sports, be it Paralympic sports or not. The important thing is to be active and get out and keep fit is the most important thing. In terms of some contacts, relevant contacts for you all beyond today, if you've got any questions about classification, there's an email there, classification@paralympic.org.au, or our website to do with classification. If you've got any pathways questions, feel free to forward them through to pathways@paralympic.org.au. And we're more than happy to answer a couple of questions if anyone has any questions before we wrap it up.
I might just jump in there quickly. So guys, before, if you decide that this is something you want to do and before going into classification, the documents available online for any of the sports, particularly, wind athletics. So I know that document backwards, but have a look at it and see where you fit. You'll be able to see some of the tests that they'll be doing. It may not be those specific ones. They're always a little bit different, and you can always have someone in there to support you. I've had my coach who understands. He was a Paralympic athlete himself in discus, John Eden, but he was a great support for me because he could communicate how my impairment affected me in that sport. And it's always good to have that little bit of support in there, just because you can be a little bit nervous. Even myself, I was a little nervous, but having John there as backup, was really good for me. So know your disability, know how it fits with the documentation, get yourself some support, and classification is not something to be worried about.
And we do have actually within the on the website some really basic fact sheets in terms of who's eligible for each sport. But as I mentioned, and I really want to reiterate, just because you might not be eligible from a para pathway to participate in a particular sport, it doesn't mean to say you might not be able to participate and play in that sport. It's just once you progress in the para pathway, then you might need to be classified. So it's just something to be aware of. I just want to ask you, Josh, one last question around some of the, I guess, what are some of the barriers that you found to participate in para sport? What are some of those critical ones that you faced?
Well, I guess with the sports in general is, with wheelchair rugby and then with the track, the apparatuses you got to use, whether it be a wheelchair or a track racing chair, they can be quite expensive. And from my side, I was quite fortunate because I'm TAC. But, it's fantastic now that we have, the NDIS, where you include that into your plan. And I guess taking a step back, that's where it's really good to reach out to those that are experienced because, again, with those chairs, there's a lot of biomechanics and setups that go into it. So I guess reaching out to yourself, Tim, where you can link them with individuals that have a better understanding of those chair setups and how they should be, that can be really integral to a person developing in those sports.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And we've also got, from a Paralympic perspective, we have a Parasport Equipment Fund, which is funded by the Sport Australia, and we've had a few rounds of that program, and certainly, particularly for that equipment that someone with a disability needs to participate in sport that an able-bodied athlete wouldn't necessarily be required to use. So that might be wheelchairs or prosthetics or adaptive equipment, and that's been a really successful program as well.
Absolutely. And I think I might just do a little reminder here that later on today, if you're tuning in from the Disability Sport and Rec Festival, there is going to be a webinar on using NDIS to support your sporting goals. So tune in for that. If you're tuning in after our festival, that will be available on our YouTube channel as well. And we've got a question here that we might quickly go through if you're happy. So for new sports entering Paralympics for the first time, how does Paralympics align and categorise the sport, like, for example, badminton and the
Yep. Yeah, so badminton's a sport that's been on the para-badminton, has been contested internationally for a number of years. The 2021 Paralympic Games now in Tokyo, badminton along with para-badminton along with taekwondo, the new sports on the program. So badminton has always had a classification system that is managed, and I guess the work, the research and support for that system has been managed by BWF, the international body, and that filters down to Badminton Australia. There's a range of classes depending on the impairment, whether that be ambulant or seated players. And depending on the impairment as well, in badminton, para-badminton, is not all of the court is used, unlike it might be for able-bodied play. So there's some of those considerations and changes for para sport within the rules of the sport, in addition to the classification process. So yeah, it's just another, after Tokyo, it's just another sport on the Paralympic program, and it's great to see a new sport like badminton coming in. It's a popular sport in Australia. It's obviously really strong. There's a history of para success internationally, and we're really looking forward to hopefully having some para badminton players qualify for Tokyo next year.
Thank you so much for that, Tim. I think here might be a great chance for us to wrap up, and I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Josh and Marty for coming along today and having a chat. It's been really, really interesting to hear your pathway and your experience through, and also a huge thank you to Tim for helping put this information together and presenting today. Huge wealth of information there, and I know that this will be a great resource for everyone to come. But yeah, thank you so much again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Marty and Josh, and thanks everyone for being online.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. Cheers.